example of the rapid spread of adverse human consequences because of the interdependence of economies and people. And that includes India as well. As a nation, we are very interdependent on economic resources and in a community, and how one community which may have less resources and famine impacts the next community right away, or there is migration from one state to the other in large numbers, because it's not possible to be viable and survive in one part of the world, in one part of the country. Millions of people lost prosperity and livelihoods after the 1994 crash, and education and health services were among the first to deteriorate in the region, which included India, and the effects included social unrest, poverty are still evident. So if you look at the countries in Southeast Asia that were affected by the crash, those impacts are still economically visible. Domestic violence and suicide rate increased in the period in several countries in the region, and India was one of them. Myanmar or Burma was another one. Nepal, for example, was another one. Pakistan was another one. It is believed that illicit drug trade in the world has grown in recent years to form a significant portion of the total business of the drug trade world from that portion of the world. So even as economic situation deteriorated, that showed an increase in the illicit drug trade was increasing. But let me go back to the business perspective of globalization. In a capitalistic market, multinational companies are taking the lead in establishing themselves and creating major presence in every part of the world. So 200 years ago, 250 years ago, England or Britain was the imperial ruler over India. Today, it's multinationals. Okay, not just over India, actually over the global economy. So it's no longer a war between or independence from a nation of being subjugated. It is multinational companies dominating decisions of what India can and cannot do, for example. Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Nikes are examples of such growth and proliferation in the last 20 years. Media has a very interesting part to play in advertising the benefits of products and services. And we in India, I know, have had a huge campaign against Coca-Cola, which is interesting. I believe in Bangalore, where my parents live, Coca-Cola is hard to find. And there was a movement to not actually drink Coca-Cola, which was very interesting to me. So they actually will drink coconut water or Indian soft drinks. And there is a clear movement of some local stores to not carry American products. And that's a perspective that one has to pay attention to. That not everybody may be interested in actually, purchasing everything that looks different or is being sold. How the media plays a role is, as you advertise the benefits, the companies are saying, if you buy Coca-Cola or wear Nike shoes or eat McDonald's, it's better and superior. And as media plays a role, you start thinking it's better and superior. I believe in the world, the media, for a minute or a minute and a half of an advertisement, they pay billions of dollars. So they have done some good research on human behavior and how it impacts decisions. And slowly, the food you eat, the clothes you wear, the lifestyle we lead begins to change. And people as consumers then become studied for their patterns and behavior of spending and how they make choices. And believe me, it's very interesting. As I live and work, I have the opportunity to engage with all kinds of professionals in different settings. When you work in medicine, you practically see everybody. And there are people studying very small as one, choose one toilet tissue over another. They're actually making long-term projects on this. And to me, I'm like, you're wasting resources, go study people. Take money away for something important, but it's business. At one level, it may appear that globalization has no significant impact on families, and our lives are normal in most circumstances. But many people are not aware of how they form a crucial part of this global phenomenon. So actually, as individuals, we don't sit and think, oh, this is impacting my life. It just keeps on happening around you. And after a while, you start taking on some of the characteristics. The reality is every single individual, whichever part of the world you are in, will be affected in one way or the other. These changes affect people's identities, cultural values, which can actually become altered significantly. After a period of time, you start changing what you believe in very slowly. Whether it is between generations, intrapersonally, so for yourself, new values can cause dissonance, difficulty, and conflict with existing deeper-rooted values. And yesterday, many of the presentations talked about identity, and that a lot of conflict happens when you want to actually establish your identity or hold on to what you have. Sometimes transitions and changes can cause further difficulty with internal growth and development. And for the purpose of this presentation, I thought I'd like to share with you the psychological impact of globalization. And I gave 4 different steps identify as I speak. The most significant psychological consequence of globalization, it is that it transforms your identity as an individual, as a person from a particular country, or as a person from a particular community. It actually starts impacting your identity. And a social psychologist has actually identified 4 major issues of how it impacts identity. The first is the development of a bicultural identity. And perhaps you can also call it hybrid identity, which means that a part of one's identity is rooted in the local, in the global world, as well as it is rooted in your local culture. So I may be living in India, and I am definitely an Indian woman, but as I start wearing Western clothes and perhaps work for a high-tech company, I might start amenities occurring. People today, especially the young, develop an identity that gives them a sense of belonging to a worldwide culture that includes awareness of events, practices, styles, and information. So, kids, children in India definitely wear Nike shoes, see MTV, there's even Indian MTV, and they feel very global. They're very much a part of the global scene. It's not uncommon. Media, such as television and especially the internet, don't forget the internet, that's actually a more impactful process than you would ever believe. The internet source that allows for instant communication. So I can actually speak to somebody in Latvia very easily over the internet and find out something if I'm interested in. Is important in helping with global identity. Yet along with this new global identity, people continue to retain and develop their local identity. Okay? As traditional culture and practices and beliefs change, a bicultural or a hybrid multicultural identity is likely to develop that includes your native, local, and global culture. So, for example, for me, I am actually a hybrid even between 2 cultures in India. Gerda mentioned that I'm from Assam, my father is from the south, so I have a hybrid identity right there. I'm an Indian, that's my native identity. Now I live in the US, I don't even know what my identity is anymore, and yet I can say I am a person that can move around anywhere in the world, hopefully. The second issue is identity confusion, where individuals from non-Western cultures experience as a response to globalization. Okay? And the reason I say identity confusion is with non-Western cultures is because that's where it's most studied. While people adapt to changes and develop a bicultural or hybrid identity, some may find it difficult to change rapidly. And when the identity was very upset for no rhyme or reason, and faculty, my other colleagues, were having a difficult time working with him because he just would not respond in the ways they needed him to respond to take care of patients. Like everybody says, okay, Shobha, you're the psychology person, talk to them. So I didn't want to pounce on him. I said, oh, let's have a chat. How long has it been since you've gone back home? He said, 5 years. I said, number 1 reason, you need to go every 3 years. And he looks at me, he's like, are you telling me to do this as a treatment? I said, yes, it is. And he said, why? I said, do you talk to other? Is very close to his family. And he perceives as further he goes along in remaining in the US, that identity may not remain, and that's difficult for him. And he couldn't express that. Even now, as he comes and looks at me, he thinks he needs to clarify his identity, and I say to him, Mehdi, it's all right, just keep, because years ago, as a graduate student myself, I had the same issue. And I could recognize it in this young man's need to feel like he can talk about the identity issue, which perhaps many of his colleagues may not understand. So that's the identity confusion I'm talking about. And it does impact individuals greatly. The third is a self-selected culture. That's another aspect of identity and psychological impact. And to just give you a brief idea of what that means is people choose to form groups with like-minded people who wish to have an identity that is untainted by the global culture and its values. So in reaction to actually adapting and assimilating into the larger culture, you may say, I don't want this, I'm going to go and find, Bob or Bill or to say, you and I think alike? Okay, yeah, I don't like that. You don't like that either? Okay, now we form our own little group in order to create some identity. The self-selected culture, for the most part, can actually be okay if it is not threatening to the larger majority around you. And sometimes self-selected cultures can also have a negative fundamentalistic view, which is an interesting dimension. I won't go into that in much detail. But for most people worldwide, what the global culture has to offer is appealing, but for the self-selected groups, they don't find it appealing and they form their own separate group to create their own identity. Sometimes these fundamentalism or have very clear non-religious anti-global views. And of course, even in my country, in India, there are groups, self-selected groups that don't want globalization and are having a very anti-Western, sometimes it's misconstrued as anti-American, but it's a very anti-Western perspective. The fourth is the spreading of emerging adulthood. What that means is, usually adulthood and accomplishing adulthood was a certain number of years. As you become an older teenager into your early adulthood, but those are different now. People are choosing their professions by their own, from their own thoughts. And because that is breaking down, the adult hierarchy is breaking down, traditional hierarchy, the young people are forced to develop control of their own lives, including marriage and parenthood, especially in India. So the decision making has now fallen on younger generation much more, and that may not be something many young people are prepared for. So, to sum up, globalization appears to be a significant force in the psychological development of people in the 21st century, and it's been going on in actually many cultures for many centuries. Cultures have long influenced each other through trade, migration, and war in the past. As a consequence of globalization, the challenges of creating a viable identity was perhaps greater than they have ever been in the past. According to Giddens, and erodes traditional ways and identity, it has to be created and recreated. The identity has to be created and recreated many times, which was different, say, 50 years ago. Identity is less influenced by social roles that are prescribed and based more on individual choices, decisions that each person makes about what values to embrace, what paths to pursue, both in work, choices of partner in relationships, some confusion, but there are others who react to this responsibility with identity confusion as we talk, or seek refuge in self-selected cultures. Let me go briefly into the social and cultural aspects. Okay? As a native of India, I've gone through my own changes as I've moved to the US. But what's been interesting to me is to look at the Indian community who has migrated for work and for choices of education. Are actually now some of them going back. What is that identity change? How is it impacting families? How is it impacting decisions that they make that impact more than one person at a time? But just to give you a brief picture of India. India is a diverse country. And believe it or not, 16% of the world's population lives in the country. It's pretty large in terms of numbers. 826 languages, not all of which are recognized. Percent of the population still lives in rural areas. And it's rapidly urbanizing with 225 cities in India with over 100,000 population and at least 10 cities alone with over 1 million people. Okay, that's huge urbanization. India's population is aging very rapidly. By UN standards, if you are older by above 60 years of age, your country is, and the UN standard is about 6%. So if 6% of your population is above 60 years of age, it's called an aging country. We are 7.7, so very much aging, quite rapidly too. And this number will actually increase to 12.6 by 2025. And as Better health has taken place, better childcare facilities slowly, and reduced infant mortality rates. People are living longer. There are also resources that they're using more. They're also moving to cities and leaving villages and towns and rural areas away. And the culture is changing very rapidly, and especially the urban areas. Let me talk a little bit in terms of what's happening to the family. Traditional family network is eroding. What used to be joint families, as you may have heard about in India, is as a nuclear family with a parent or an aunt or an uncle in the home, an elderly person in the home, identified as an extended family. But as young people are migrating away, that's becoming more and more nuclear. Family support is less and less valued and less available to people. For those who lived with extended families, the elderly had to live in harmony with the younger generation. So the elderly who are now forced to rechange their attitudes or adapt to living with the younger generation who's changing very rapidly. So even the elderly are being pushed to change. Arranged marriage, for example, in cities, young people are starting to choose their own partners. Not uncommon anymore. Arranged marriages, however, still continue. And divorce rates are increasing, especially in cities. Okay? Bangalore is the divorce capital of the country. Okay? Another correlation to technology changes. However, single parenthood is not yet a part of the Indian culture. According to the Ministry of Health reports of 1997, and there's no other data that I have, teenage pregnancies are actually on the rise, an all-time high in India, especially in the south state of Kerala. A beautiful state, but that's been a change. And the western state of Maharashtra. Every aspect of India, Western fashions are coming in, traditional clothes are changing, TV news readers are wearing Western clothes, MTV tells you how to dress up, Indian young people, patterns for dress, jargon, language. I watch Indian television in the US. Some of the slang words I don't use. Very interesting. But there is a different side to India as well, as is actually unconstitutional by Indian constitution, still continues. 60 to 150 million children work in India today. And believe it or not, it's increasing in the more global industries of arts and handicrafts. The beautiful carpets that come to the West are actually made by children. Okay? So that demand in the country is actually being supplied by children, and children are not paid decent, they're paid almost 1/10 or less the wages. Reports indicate that urban children and youth face significant competition and pressure. So children even in the cities are having difficulty. And there is less and less supervision as joint parental systems are weakening. There is increase in violence and aggression. Okay? And in terms of women, that is also changing rapidly. On one hand, women have begun, it has improved the status of women. Women are working, they're making as good wages in some sectors, not all, such as high tech. Not all the areas, but some areas of high tech are equal salaries for men and women. So they like the economic independence. But is it truly benefiting women at large? And that's the ultimate question. The indicators of a country changing from poverty to a non-poverty status is education and access to healthcare. And in these two areas, so if you want to see a country improve from a poverty status to a better status, those two indicators have to be matched. And these are international standards. Those are not happening. So while women may earn more, they're still being socially and economically exploited, in especially the poorer sectors, although middle-class educated women are doing better with wages and flex timings in the high-tech industry. For most women, their domestic responsibilities are not changed. So working women actually have to work extra, and that's impacting families. And as employment sectors of information technology is increasing, there's another change that's happening in another area, which is prostitution, abuse, and dowry related with education. That would change. That's not happening. And perhaps one of the reasons sociologists look at is there's more greed for consumerism, from consumerism. There's more demand for dowry debts, that's an indication of money in marriages. That's changing as well. So globalization and marginalization go hand in hand in India. Okay, and the word that I'm interested in talking about is marginalization. Let me give you some statistics, and I'll run through a brief slide. Millions of poor farmers, laborers, and urban unemployed slum dwellers include 3 million refugees and millions displaced by development projects. Poverty in this era of globalization has assumed new dimensions, and that's not being talked about as we talk about high-tech industry in India at all. Okay? Nobody's actually talking about this. So to end this, and as I show you the slides, I just wanted to talk about, just give this statement. Amartya Sen again said, even if the poor were to get a little richer, this would not necessarily imply that we have vast benefits of global economic interrelations. And that's another indicator for me to look at how countries and families change. So let me quickly run through some slides of Bangalore. Here is a photograph of an Indian woman in a traditional outfit. Behind you see a billboard with Western clothes advertised. In Bangalore, where actually the dream American house is being identified as the American way of living. Perfect picket fences, beautiful area. The children are working, if you can see in the forefront. Laying fiber optics for Bangalore. And this man, who probably is uneducated laborer, who perhaps his children may benefit from the fiber optics, is working at below shanty towns, slums in Bangalore. Okay? Promoting globalization in the film world, and actually this was a film advertisement. Below that are slums. There's a woman trying to wash and cook. Like all cities, Bangalore with 5 million people is a sprawl of decaying houses and shops and shanty towns. This is not shown when multinationals go in. Information technology. 5 billion software exports, a fraction of the global exports of almost 200 billion in India. However, India has only 3 computers per thousand and expects to rise by 2008 to 20 per thousand. The digital divide. I'm trying to see if this can focus. If you see, this is a picture of a train station where a laborer is laying down on the floor. Right next to him is a computer tech guy selling tickets on the computer. So, poverty at different levels. This was a very interesting 2002 Information Technology Exposition in Bangalore. These are actually all school kids on the computer internet. Thousands of them. I couldn't even fit the whole picture. It's amazing. Here is Americanization of India. Indian teleworkers learning American. There is an American-Canadian man who teaches how to speak in American language. If you're a Dell computer user or a computer user and you want technical support, you would actually be connected to India. And when they pick up the phone, they will say, "Hi, I'm Margaret." It's not Margaret, it's probably Madhu. She's been invited to, she's been told she has to present herself as Margaret. She speaks with an American accent, and interestingly enough, they are actually shown hours and hours worth of American television. Then they shut off the voice and they are asked to speak. What they in this film, I think they're watching Friends, Ally McBeal, and Eddie Murphy shows in this particular unit. There are young children. Incense sticks. The industry of incense sticks is dominated by women and children. Child labor. This is the dangerous aspect of Bangalore, where there is no infrastructure, difficulty to cross the road. Estimated by 2010, the figure will be 400 million in cities in India. Westernizing food and entertainment, TGIF. There is an Indian cowboy in an Indian hat selling Western food to, believe it or not, mostly Indian consumers who believe Western food or burgers are the best way to go. an environment poll of 20,000 people in 20 countries found that 2 to 1 per. So 50% of the people in the poll said they believe globalization is beneficial, but there was also the biggest concern in that 20,000 poll was fear to losing their culture. And that's typically an Indian story as well. Probably a story of globalization for many parts of the world as well. So, that's it. Thank you.
We also could do that on Europe, what was changed in Europe. We are very well in time, but perhaps the other group also has taken more time. So I think we can afford to have a few questions or comments or statements. Please.
We were mentioning the call centers. I've come across a study about the call centers you were talking. What a huge or disastrous effect those call centers have on psychological status of people working here, listening to friends, and then you have to talk as if you're American. I mean, we were laughing, but I mean, this is schizophrenic,
Yes.
and people have huge problems with
Yes.
that.
What's interesting is, in order to get more work out of people, corporations are sending buses to your home to pick you up so that you arrive to work on time, and then they drop you. So you have no way of getting back home, and they are saying, okay, you're able to come on time and leave on time, and see, we provide you a service. So Wipro has the biggest bus system in Bangalore. It's not the local bus service, but Wipro, which is a computer company, is doing this. Most women and men are really struggling with this. Call centers and out-processing. Very bad situations. It's affecting relationships big time, and divorce is on the increase. Children are actually suffering. And here is what's interesting. There's a need for grandparents to come back into the picture to take care of the grandchildren. So the extended family is returning in some interesting ways, but more out of a need, not by choice alone. Yeah, it is very difficult. And many of them say, I'm too stressed out. 22-year-old people are saying, I'm burned out. Okay. That is not something I would have heard. There was no question. I never knew the word burnt out when I was 22 and back in India.
It is a more fair chance now in the world economy.
Short term. Yes. My concern, and this is a very personal view, is what will happen if multinational companies say, okay, let's move to Indonesia. It's cheaper to go to Indonesia. So globalization, which is now, people, when I live in the US, people say, oh, you Indians are taking away our jobs. And I said, oh, no. American firms are actually placing the jobs there because you are cutting corners. Okay? You are taking over the jobs to send to India. And tomorrow they'll go to a different country. But to pretend that that can be sustained unless Indian companies can see a fair chance for very long. So it's, in my view, a very short-term perspective to adjust to it differently economically. I had copies of my paper.
The number of Indian companies are also globalizing and they are also moving out in the world. And India has many such companies which are growing by themselves. They are Indians and they are expanding their operations all
around
over
the world. Yes.
Is there something like family mediation existing in the extended family, US or India?
Let me have the expert here on mediation.
Yes,
speak. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
there are family mediations. There are every family court, all disputes of the family of all kinds, including matrimonial, children custody,
Yes.
alimony. All these questions are referred to family court. And every family court is provided with the help of counselors, psychologists, and also the mediators. But mediators are a new concept, and it's gradually developing law that even a judge has to try to bring about judicial settlement before the case is referred further.
I'm working for the International Organization for Migration in Geneva, and of course, we are talking about globalization from the migration aspect, so letting the trade aspect behind.
Right.
And I'm just coming from a conference on the impact of migration on indigenous people. And at the beginning, by the indigenous people, because on one hand, the indigenous people, they feel forced to migrate to other countries with a view of looking for better economical opportunities and for earning money. But often they stay away for years, and it's usually only one part of the family, which is the father, who stays away for a lot of years. And when he is returning, he has changed, and his identity has changed, the community, or the whole community of the indigenous people. So it's interesting that they are actually in a dilemma. They perceive migration as a positive opportunity, but at the same time they're aware of the fact that it affects negatively their identity. So now there is the tendency of them to see what can we do, how can we perceive our identity. And our organization has now implemented some projects of helping to be trained also when they go away. What are they expecting? Because sometimes they're surprised, they're going away, they don't know what they find in America. We had a conference in particular with Latin American indigenous groups and communities. And so we are trying to prepare them what they may find when they migrate, and how they can perceive their identity.
I have to be very cruel to cut them off. Perhaps there is much to discuss outside. I just have to announce that you are here not hidden. There are messages from perhaps your beloved ones or office or whatever waiting outside it, and there is a desk where the messages, what you got, telephone messages, what you got, can be seen. The next speaker will be Viola Rachet, and she will talk also about moral